the things we do with the My Armenia, the craft festival, is because it's for artisans. We do we reach out to retailers and restaurants to come, and hotels to come and visit the artisans because they've become a really big customer base for them. So a lot of the potters, ceramicists that we work with are now making dishes for restaurants. We have a basket weaver who's making lighting for restaurants and hotels. And then different retail shops come and they'll actually buy products that they can then sell in their souvenir shops. So it's a way for them to make new trade connections as well. So even though the festival itself is for the general public, we also use it as like a business to business kind of event too. So making sure that those people are also invited as one of the audiences. Okay, we're gonna switch to the topic of financial sustainability. So this one's all about math and a lot of hard work. So what we're gonna cover in this topic is building a budget, creating a budget cycle and reviews, and how to make a profit if you're seeking a profit from the festival. There's a difference between different kinds of organizations in the format. So the first thing I want to ask is for people who have a festival already, raise your hand if you, well, first of all, raise your hand if you're implementing festivals right now. Not in the planning phase, but actually implementing them. Yeah. Okay, so do you have a budget? Like in Microsoft Excel? Great. Okay. Not everyone raised their hand. Do you have a budget? No? No? It's okay. A lot of festivals don't do budgets. For those of you who have budgets, when do you actually make the budget? Before the festival? How long before the festival do you make the budget?
Should I do it in English? Or?
It's Bosnian, it's fine.
Okay. Pa svake godine po završetku prethodnog festivala, nakon toga u roku od nekih možda mjesec dana poslije evaluacije pravi se novi budžet za naredni festival, pošto priprema traje cijelu godinu, tako da kroz cijelu godinu ide i budžet.
Great. What about you?
Obzirom da mi ne pravimo na kraju godine, nego prije samog početka festivala, kad skupimo sva sredstva na računu, pravimo neki kao forecast budžeta. Međutim, nakon samog festivala, jer uvijek iskrsnu neki dodatni troškovi na koje vi ne računate ili koji tako spontano dođu, nakon festivala podvučemo, da kažem tako, liniju, jel? I imamo Excel tabelu i formu i tu sve stavljamo prihode i rashode i na kraju vidimo koliko smo imali troškova i koliko je u principu sve to iznosilo.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, I'm really glad to have both of these examples because these are typically the two ways that, well, there's three ways I've experienced that people work on with financials on festivals. One, they don't have a budget at all, and they never make one. And they just get money and then they spend it and hope for the best. That happens a lot. The second is what you're describing, which sounds like you fundraise first. So you start with the income, like figuring out how much money you'll have, and then you allocate the expenses based on how much budget you actually have available to you, how much resources. And then the third is more of a planning approach where you're making a budget for the next year and then understanding what the costs are, and then that's maybe driving the fundraising. Is that right? Yeah? Okay. I want to say there's no right or wrong answer. However, I will say that if you go in the third area, it allows for growth. It gives you a lot more flexibility and understanding what it is that you can do. So we're going to go through building a budget. So I want to encourage everyone, and this is especially, very, very important if you're first starting out as well. And when you're planning for a festival, the first time you do it, it's going to be difficult to know all the costs that are involved. And so to the extent that you've made some new friends over the last 2 days, I recommend asking for advice on the line items. And we're going to go through some exercises and share information about what types of budget line items you need to prepare for, since so many of you are planning new festivals. But you always need to really understand how much money it is that you're going to need for the festival. We debate about this at our institution all the time, and I'll get into some examples because I also fundraised for the festival that I curated for Smithsonian. And it was really interesting because when I went to our financial office and I said, okay, how much money do I need to fundraise? And they said, as much as possible. And I said, well, I need some basis. Like, how do I know? And so then I ended up making a very detailed budget template because I knew that I wanted to bring about 100 people from Armenia to come to the festival. And so I was able to make estimates of what those travel costs would be. And I started building that and using that as a target because I knew then if I wanted to bring all 100 people and build out everything that, you saw the site map and everything that we wanted to build, I worked with all of our team. It was a lot of work to understand the build out, how many supplies we would need for our workshops, food for all of the participants, lodging, airfare, visas, all of those costs. And at the end of the day, I had to raise $1.2 million to be able to accomplish that. And what happened is there was also a perception that, okay, well, if we bring fewer people, it's going to get a lot cheaper. And then I looked at my budget tool and I said, no, it doesn't matter. Even if I bring 80 people, that's only going to save us $50,000. So when you have knowledge, it's power. It allows you to make decisions. And I can't tell you, like when I was curating that festival and fundraising for it, I went in that budget tool every single day and worked on scenarios and made adjustments and looked at where we had cost savings. And I used that as that was, aside from our statement of purpose, which has the concept and that whole template, the budget was the next most important thing for making the festival happen. So I strongly encourage you to take the approach of, as soon as your previous festival finished, beginning work on the next festival and looking at what costs you're going to need. Because what it's going to also give you a sense of is maybe you're starting with some income, maybe you know that somebody's going to fund the festival, and so you know what you're starting with, but then it's also going to let you know where there are gaps. And if you have new ideas of other things that you want to do, then you're going to know what you have and what you need so that you have a target for fundraising. Having a target for fundraising is really, really helpful. So the important message, oh, you have a question?
Actually, just a statement. So can you please unraise for all of us? So it's 1.2 million.
I'm going to tell you how I did it. It was like the biggest accomplishment of my career. I don't know what was more satisfying to me, actually doing the festival or the fact I raised $1.2 million in 6 months. And it was crazy. I'm going to share the story with you because I think anyone can do it. I was never trained in fundraising. Anyone can do it. So I'm going to give you the tips on how I did it. But the important thing with budgeting is to start from where you are and then move towards where you want to be. So really kind of understanding, it's all about gathering information. So first things first, there are going to be some differences depending on what type of entity you are. And so if you're a for-profit, your approach to this is going to be different than if you're a nonprofit, obviously. And we have a couple people in here working from the private sector, and so your goals might be different. You might be wanting to have a festival that generates profit for you as a business, which makes great sense. For those of you who are doing more of like a social impact kind of festival or something that's more focused on cultural heritage preservation as like a altruistic kind of goal, maybe you're a nonprofit structure, and it's still great to end the festival with money in the bank because you can use it the next time. but the reporting on all of that will obviously be different for accounting, and I'm not going to get into those details because I don't know accounting in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but I'm going to give you kind of the broad brushstrokes of how you're going to do this. And we're going to talk about profit making versus break even and how to figure that out. So also, I know that there were some questions from our assessment about the difference between direct and indirect costs. And this is something that's also relevant because when you're doing a festival, there are the costs that arise directly from the festival itself, but then there are the costs of the preparation and fees and things like that that are, you kind of have to pay the whole year, but aren't directly related to the event. And so it matters because of reporting requirements, and there are often tax implications on direct versus indirect costs. So the difference between the two is that direct costs can be clearly and directly attributed to production. So in this case, it's going to be the costs that are directly attributed to the event, and we'll get into some examples. Indirect costs are typically the general costs of doing business. So for festivals, they can go beyond the event into the, like beyond the event itself into the cost of running the organization. So some typical direct costs that you need to consider. Staffing. Again, this is staffing during the festival itself. What staff do you need to pay to actually get the festival done? If you're working with an event management firm, then maybe that's, you're hiring staff to do that. But if not, maybe it's your own staff that you have to bring on to actually make the festival happen. Often there's a rental fee associated with a venue. That's also a direct cost. Equipment rental. Most festivals need tents, tables, chairs, stages, sound equipment, all of that kind of equipment. That's all direct costs related to the festival. Services and vendor contracts. If you're renting toilets, or what are some other examples of vendors that you might have for your festival? Any examples? Security, great, yeah. Water, bringing in water, yep. Yep, cleaning. Clearing? Catering, yes, yes. Definitely. You might also have travel costs for participants, depending on where they're coming from. That's a huge one for us. It's the bulk of the budget because we're bringing so many people internationally. And other costs related to participants. I'm glad you said catering, because something that is so important that a lot of people don't think about is even when you're having a festival just for a day, if you don't create time and space for people to eat, they're going to eat in front of all the visitors, and it's going to be a mess. So we did, for the Crafts Festival in Armenia, and we do the same thing in Washington for our festival, is we create a ticket program where people are not allowed to eat on the festival site, but they get a ticket where they can go either, like for the Crafts Festival, we don't have food vendors, it's only craft, but there are a lot of cafes around, so we prepay for a lunch, and we do shifts. So we give people a ticket, and they're able to go at 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, and then our volunteers help us to make sure they go to the restaurant and eat and come back. And it adds, so I know it seems like a small thing, but it adds a lot to the professionalism of the event, but it can also be expensive. So thinking about how you're gonna handle that is really important too. Are there other direct costs that you think you might have for the festival?
Ima jako puno troškova kojima mi vrlo često recimo da razmišljamo dok ne dođe moment da moramo. Recimo po zakonu o javnim okupljanjima za sve javna okupljanja preko 100 osoba mora se platiti hitna, to jest služba hitne pomoći da bude na mjestu događaja, vatrogasci i tako dalje. I sad vi planirate festival, ne znam, bit će neki low muzički događaj i tako dalje, ali bit će preko 100 osoba, ali morate platiti i to sanitetsko vozilo i vatrogasce i čišćenje, ne znam, i tako dalje. I onda skontate da, mislim, uopšte niste razmišljali o tome, da ne znam, nemate pojma koji su to cijene, a kad vam dođe račun, glava vas zaboli. To su one nekakvi skriveni troškovi o kojima vrlo često znamo zaboraviti, a moramo ih pokriti jer zakon tako nalaže.
Yeah. And now, thanks to you, they're no longer hidden. Everyone should have them in their budgets. You should all be thinking about it. What other hidden costs might there be what other costs have you, for those of you who've had festivals, what are some costs that have surprised you that you weren't prepared for? Anything else?
Pa čisto da pojasnim. Izvore direktnih troškova, ukoliko smo sačinili znači ranije, ukoliko je menadžment, odnosno odbor za organizaciju festivala sačinio detaljan plan aktivnosti, iz samih aktivnosti proizilazi svaki detalj, pa i ovaj što je kolegica napominjala. Znači, svaki oblik, vid rizika, ovo što je napominjala ona, mislim, se mora predvidjeti u ovom dijelu planiranih aktivnosti. Znači, sve te planirane aktivnosti su detaljno razrađene vremenski i naravno da budžet prema tim aktivnostima moramo prilagoditi do svakog planiranog detalja.
Mi smo sada za ovu konferenciju što smo radili, troškove koje smo imali, to su u biti, imate press wall, onda imate troškove bine, imate troškove voditelja koji će voditi konferenciju ili bilo koji u aktivnost takvog sadržaja. Ručak smo imali za govornike i taj ručak uopšte nije bio u budžetu kojim smo se mi nadali, nego troduplo više, jer dođu ljudi koji ne možete odbiti, odnosno ne može jedan čovjek da jede, drugi čovjek da ne jede i u biti nisu na ručku, nisu ni bili planirani pola tih ljudi koji su bili tu. Šta smo još imali? Imali smo live prenos, njemu se isto nismo nadali, on nam iskrsnuo u zadnji čas, to su isto troškovi koje vi morate snositi, tako da opet sve vam zavisi od događaja do događaja. A dok kad smo radili dječje festivale i sajmove, pola tih troškova nismo imali koji smo imali na ovom sada događaju. Tako da je opet sve to individualno i sve to nekako zna da iskrsne u zadnji čas i ti troškovi koje vi ne planirate. Jel? Tako da uvijek sada kad radimo taj neki forecast, odvajamo ta neka možda dodatna sredstva, odnosno te neočekivane troškove koji nam mogu iskrsnuti.
I just want to say contingency planning is really important. We usually put anywhere from, it depends on your budget, but anywhere from 5 to 20% contingency when you're planning to be able to have extra cash in your reserves to deal with those unexpected costs. And that food thing, it's like, seems very simple, but it's quite complicated. We just had the exact same problem where the artisans who participated in the festival, they brought their kids and we didn't know. And so how are we going to turn away a 5-year-old who's with his dad staffing his booth for lunch? So our food costs increased a lot because we had extra people that came with the artisans, even though we communicated to them that we were only paying for them. But in the moment, you're a human. Of course you want to give a 5-year-old a lunch, you know? So those are things too that the contingency is really important for that. Yeah. Were you going to say something else?
Ja sam htio isto slično to da kažem, jedan tip u pravljenju budžeta da se mogu staviti dvije stavke. Jedna je neplanirani troškovi koji mogu da iznose 5% ovih direktnih troškova, a druga stvar je isto jedna stavka koja se to zove se petty cash, koja iznosi isto 5% ovih direktnih troškova i to može da izvuče u stvar neke te neplanirane troškove, ali se sve to može staviti u budžet za bilo koji projekat ili bilo koji projektni prijedlog. Imaju dvije stavke. Jedna je neplanirani troškovi, a ova druga je petty cash. To je u stvari po zakonu isto tako u BiH možeš da izvučeš određeni dio gotovine koji možeš da raspolažeš za neke stvari koje nisu očekivane. Ali to ne bi trebalo da prelazi 5% budžeta. Nećeš moći opravdati.
I'm going to give you in your toolkit, in your toolkit, you're going to get a budget template from our festival, which is huge, and it has every single line item of costs. It doesn't have the amounts, but it gives you, like, if you're putting on a festival for 700,000 people, it has line items of all those costs. And so what you can do if you don't have a budget tool yet is you can use it as a sort of checklist, kind of going through and delete the lines that you're not using, but you can use it as a basis to kind of try and cover and really think through all of the things that you might need. Because sometimes there's also transportation costs that you're not thinking of. There's just so many things like that. And what I will say too, I mentioned about the percentages. When you're first starting a festival, you want your contingency to be a lot higher, petty cash also. And so I would encourage you to work more towards the like 15 to 20% contingency, so you have extra resources on hand. Then as you have the festival, you're going to reassess what you actually spent, and then you're going to use that to budget for the next year. So each time you do it, you have a better sense of the costs and also where you can have cost savings and where you need extra funding at the last minute. So thanks for bringing up petty cash, because that's very, very important. There's always things that are like short, you know, right there, like as you're putting on the festival that you realize you don't have, that you need to go and get. So that's very important to have cash on hand. Okay, so those are direct costs. Indirect costs are typically staffing, salary, and benefits, really like management and administration. So those are people that are going to get paid no matter what, not just because of the festival, but because they're part of the team. This is more important for organizations and private sector where you're like, you have a job, and the festival is one of the things that you do. Also, marketing and advertising are considered indirect costs, as well as insurance and fees. Can you think of anything else that might be an indirect cost for a festival? Yeah?
Utilities often gets the indirect cost.
Yeah, utilities, like for your office or?
Yeah, for the za kancelariju, struja, voda, sve ostalo, grijanje, tako dalje.
Yeah, you're not, and I will tell you something right now. When you're fundraising for a festival, no one wants to pay those things. So indirect costs sometimes are very hard to fundraise for. They'll pay for the direct costs of the festival itself, but if you need to maintain an office, that's where you need to generate that revenue for sustainability, because it's a lot easier to raise money for an event than it is to raise money for your operational year-long costs and salaries.
Pitanje osiguranja je recimo nešto što u posljednje vrijeme nam dosta onako oduzima pažnje, zato što mi u Bosni i Hercegovini nemamo toliko iskustva sa osiguranjem niti osoblja, niti gostiju, niti lokacije gdje se događaj dešava i tako dalje. Prije možda 2 mjeseca imali smo zaista jedan ružan događaj, slučajno je jedna učesnica razbila prozor 3x3 od nekakvog skupocijenog stakla koji se samo onako u šljus slomio. Mi nemamo tu praksu, recimo, interesovalo bi me kako rješavati, kako drugi rješavaju tu praksu. Mislim, mi smo nažalost počeli tražiti od naših učesnica da potpisuje da nismo odgovorne niti za bilo što, tako dalje, ali to je uvijek nekako pitanje koje nam se vraća, jer uvijek ima nepredviđenih događaja, nešto se može platiti, nešto se ne može, ali upravo ovo pitanje osiguranja, znači nikako da izađemo iz tog svrzanog problema.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. That's a topic, so we are not getting into the details of risk management just because of the volume of content that we have otherwise on the training. But I think that that's really important, and that liability waiver is something we also do for our festivals, that when people participate, that we have them sign a waiver that removes the responsibility from our organization. There are certain things we cover, and we have insurance for like, I mean, I'm trying to even think of what it is that we cover from the Smithsonian. A lot of it is all personal liability. Like if somebody has to go to the hospital, it's on their own. We'll take them to the hospital, but then they're responsible for handling all of their fees, and that kind of stuff happens a lot because it's very hot during our festival, so a lot of people get like heat stroke and stuff like that, and they have to go to the clinic, but then we don't help them with figuring that out. They have to do that on their own, which is not easy. But damage to property is something serious. I think it's a topic that we'll have to handle at another time because I don't know the context here to be able to provide any advice on it. But it's something to be aware of and to make sure that you're doing research. And remember when we were talking about the site, being conscious of that when you're looking at the venue and like where you're going to have the event, and being conscious of damages that might be able to take place, and making sure that you're thinking about that in advance. The waiver is a good idea. Okay. So going into capturing costs, depending on the festival and what the plans are, as the gentleman in the back was saying, I should have had name tags for everyone. That very good point you made about planning, right? Like all of your activities should also drive your costs. You have to be, I had a very funny thing happen to me. So when I was managing the Armenia Folklife Festival, one of our staff came up to me and said, okay, when the festival's over and you're having the pack out, because we would get like a shipping container of all the stuff from Armenia that we would bring to Washington, like big stone carvings and weaving looms and equipment and the clay ovens and all this stuff, right? All the participant materials we would put in a shipping container to bring to Washington. So at the end of the festival, we have to pack out the festival, and some things go in a shipping container to go back to Armenia, and some things go to our warehouse that belong to the Smithsonian. And so no one ever talked to me about that. And I had someone come up to me from the staff and say, oh, would you like packers to help you with your pack out for your shipping container and for going to the warehouse? And I immediately looked at her and I said, how much is it going to cost? And she said, I don't know. And I said, well, I'm not going to answer that question until you tell me the price. Because there's a budget, you know? I knew how much money we had. In contrast to the other program from Catalonia, they went and asked them the same thing, and they said, yes, of course. And then they had a budget deficit because they had these packers come, they got a bill for it, and they hadn't planned for it. And so I have a motto for all events, no matter what. And it's honestly, it's a project management practice. Whenever somebody asks me about an activity or something, I never make a decision without pulling up a budget and saying, talk to me about how much it's going to cost. You have to think of every decision that you're making. You should be asking yourself, what are the costs related to this? And keeping track of it. So that's and it's going to change year to year. Things are going to increase in price, decrease in price. Vendors will change, things like that. So that's just something to be aware of. It's it's just always ask yourself, what is it going to cost? And think about, you want this running list of your budget that you're always turning back to. And the other piece of it that we're talking about where you have sponsorship, you don't know what's going to change. So I just had an example with our film festival and trying to project manage our Mother Tongue Film Festival that we host at the Smithsonian. And this year they did a digital film festival. And I gave them a project manager from my team this year. She's a super, super professional. And I had her on contract, and so as a contribution to their program, I put her on assignment. And I also gave them my social media person from my team so that they could work with her. And when they sent me the annual report for the film festival, they hadn't recognized the costs of those two people in their budget. And so I called them and I said, well, what are you going to do next year for project management? And they said, we don't know. And I said, well, would you like to know the cost of Anne's time? Because it was about $30,000 for her time to project manage the festival. And Cecilia, who's the communications assistant, gave you about $7,000 worth of her time. And she said, what? And so the thing is even though it was in kind, there was a cost that was covered by someone else, it raised the quality of the festival. And if they want to do it again, if I'm not giving them staff next year, they need to be able to get those funds from somewhere else. And so in-kind contributions have a lot of value. And they're awesome because you can do that through, I mean, it's great. You can do it through relationships. It's a great way to save on your costs, but you should still include those costs in your budget. Have a section where you're adding a value to your in-kind costs, because then when you're looking for sponsorship, if suddenly those people aren't available to you anymore, you need to realize the full cost of the festival. You have problems if you go to the donor and you say, oh, this festival cost $10,000, but you forgot that you had staff from another project working on it and now you don't have them anymore. And then the donor's gonna give you 10 grand and expect the same festival and you can't do it. So in-kind contributions are really important to get. They're really good for your festival, but they're very important to also recognize in your budget. So like a broken record here, make sure you capture all of your costs. This says decide on marketing channels for some reason, so we're gonna have to change that. But what we're gonna actually do right now is work on, I want you all to kind of, again, we're gonna change up groups again. So one more time, go to somebody that you don't know, and we're gonna go through direct and indirect costs. And I just want you to try and make a laundry list of your costs and then assign them as direct or indirect. And if you haven't planned like if you're in the process of creating a festival, this is a great time to brainstorm on what you think you might need. It looks like everybody's kind of talked through budgets and line items and all of that, so we're going to move on. Ladies, attention. Thank you. It's okay. I'm glad you're all connecting and talking about stuff. It's good. So I walked around. I saw everybody has lists of budget line items. Do you feel comfortable right now? Like, do you feel okay with what we've gone over? Do you want to discuss it, or we can move on? Any questions? No? Okay. Okay, so with budgeting, we were talking about timing. And I put here a budget cycle, which is gonna be different for every festival. But what's really important is to kind of segment the year into these processes of when you're gonna be doing your festival production, the dates of your actual festival, and then right after that festival ends, beginning the process, doing a review of the previous year's budget and planning for the next year. The right time to do that is as soon as you finish the festival. You should celebrate the festival being over, thank all of your participants and your sponsors, relax, go have a massage, enjoy your life and your family, and then the next week you sit down and you start working on the next year's festival. And as a part of that, then you put your budget together, and it's only once you put your budget together, really, that you kind of embark on the fundraising campaign for the next year. Because you need to have those numbers in mind when you're going to approach people to sponsor the festival. So some questions that you should ask yourself when you're doing your budget review is you should always look at planned versus actual expenses. So there's a temptation when you make your budget to edit and adjust in the budget. What I would encourage you to do is have a column for your prepared budget, and then next to it, put the actual costs. So you can really look and understand how much you thought you needed and how much you need. So it's a learning experience. So look at where you anticipated your costs to be and where you were over or under so that you can make an adjustment for the next year's budget. You can also look at places where you can cut costs. One of the things for our crafts festival is for the first few years, we had to actually pay for a hotel for the artisans coming from other parts of the country because they didn't know what to expect. It was the first time we were doing it. They weren't sure what they were going to get out of it. If we didn't cover their lodging, we were worried about the coordination, logistics, and whether or not they would even come. And so for the first 3 years, we covered the cost of their hotel. Once they had experience at the festival and they realized they were making good money selling their crafts at the festival, now we don't have that cost anymore because they come by themselves. They stay with friends and family. So sometimes there's things like that where you can cut the costs. Or you can look at how you're providing lunch, and you can look at taking it from a cafe or giving people money that they can go and spend, or having a tent where you have catering for all your participants. You can look at other areas where you can bring the costs down. And again, as I mentioned before, you can also look at in-kind contributions to help you bring the cost down. So you're going to use all the knowledge from doing the festival to plan for the next year's festival. And the longer you wait, the less you're going to remember. So it's extremely important that as soon as the festival ends, that's the time to debrief on what worked, what didn't work, and working through your budget for the next year. If you go work on other projects and come back to it 3 months later, I promise you, you're going to forget half of that knowledge that you have when the festival was happening. You always think you'll remember, and trust me, you don't. So don't wait until the next year to do the activity. So, making a profit, which that says making a profile, making a profit. So, there are a lot of different ways to generate revenue. We're going to get into fundraising next, but first let's talk about general revenue. So first and foremost, you can sell tickets for people to come to an event. If you're going to sell tickets, you got to make sure that there's a confined space where you can actually have people pass in and out so that you know that they're ticketed. So you have to think about that with your site. That's something we can't do for the Crafts Festival, or even for our festival on the National Mall, because you can't charge people. So we have to have a free festival. But if you want to charge for ticket prices, you have to think about that when you're choosing your site. You can also charge a fee for vendors who want to sell at your festival. So if you have food concessions or people selling crafts, they could book tables where they sell their products and you charge a fee for that table, and that can be revenue for you, income. You can also collect a percentage of sales, although that's really hard to do because most people aren't going to be honest with you about how much they sell. And unless you're tracking it yourself, then there's no way to really know. So we do that for our festival, but that's because we have a contract with, and we manage the concessions together. So we hire a concessions person to manage it, but then our staff do all the cashiers and things like that, and then we take a percentage of what they sell. For us, that's a big revenue for our festival. The places where we generate revenue are in the sales at the marketplace. We sell t-shirts, we sell products, we take a percentage of everything that we sell in our marketplace, and then for our food, we take a percentage of everything we sell for our food. And for us, that's really important because the money from food and from crafts, that all goes into a pot that we have as discretionary money for the following year. So that kind of money is great because there's no strings attached to it. It's yours, and it's yours to spend as you wish. Whereas if you're getting grants or things like that, there are always reporting requirements and strings attached. So when you can generate revenue, it's generally easier. So I mentioned our t-shirts. If you have a great brand for your festival, you can sell t-shirts and other branded merchandise, set up a booth at the festival and sell that, and you can generate revenue that way. You can also work with a Wi-Fi provider and sell Wi-Fi access for people at the festival if that's needed, or mobile phone charging. You can offer small fees for that. Those are just some things that festivals do. You can also kind of combine that with like a VIP ticket. So there's like a space where you can hang out and it has Wi-Fi and mobile phone charging, and that's part of a higher price ticket that you buy. That's also an option. And then finally, fundraising. Yes.
Samo jedna informacija za kolege koji su iz nevladnih organizacija i neprofitnih organizacija. Sve ovo se ne može raditi zato što je zabranjeno. U slučaju da želite da prodate karte, to ne možete raditi zato što nemate način da izdate bilo kakvu vrstu računa. Ako ste, znači, kažem, ukoliko ste nevladna organizacija ili neprofitna organizacija, to zakonski ne možete raditi. Ne možete prodavati robu, ne možete naplaćivati prodaju, ne možete naknade za štandove i ostalo. Ukoliko ste privatni ili firma ili neki, ne znam kako je za ove javne ustanove, ali za nevladni sektor je tako. Morate imati fiskalni račun da bi mogli bilo šta od ovog raditi i platiti porez na to. To se radi na neke druge načine, da se razumijem.
Yeah. I would be very surprised if there's not a way around that. I've never experienced a place where there isn't some way to sell tickets, even if you're a nonprofit. You have to have some way to generate income for your organization. So I'm going to check with our team and see what information we can find out about that to share with you, because I think there's not, that doesn't, I've never, I mean, unless it's like super restrictive here compared to other places that I'm, there's literally no way to even sell tickets? That's fine. That's fine.
If you sell T-shirt and if you get inspected, you will get a fine because that's direct sale.
Oh, got it. But you can sell tickets, but you can count the tickets as a donation to the organization. It's about your messaging.
Yes, but ukoliko radite bilo kakvo, morate imati račun, a kao nevladna organizacija ne možete imati profit, ne možete praviti račun. Tako da ne možete izvaditi fiskalni račun, morate biti DO, DO ili nešto tako. Obrt. To, znači, na svim festivalima koje mi radimo, to je tako, morate naći neke druge načine za te stvari.
Okay, so what if you partner with a private company to handle your ticket sales and merchandise, and then they make a donation to your organization as a result?
Yep.
There we go.
Like
we found a workaround.
Ima puno drugačijih isto načina na koji se to može raditi, ali generalno kao da se reklamira prodaja na taj način ne može.
Okay, that's really good to know. But again, so this is where partnerships come in. If that's the case, if you're thinking about starting a festival, so then maybe you want to think differently about what kind of organization you set up to actually run the festival, but also think about the partnerships that you want to form as a piece of that and dividing that so you're not breaking the law, but you're having some sort of an agreement between a nonprofit and a private sector, maybe events company that can handle the ticket sales that can go towards the event. That's really good to know. Okay, so in addition to generating revenue, you can also cut costs. So this is a space where if you're an organization who's having a lot of events and festivals, you can buy equipment instead of renting it. This can be a little bit complicated, but if you have the space and the storage, it's something, because then you can use that equipment for each event and it really saves on the cost. Like if you can get a grant, for example, to purchase equipment and then use it over and over. I know for a lot of our events, the tents and table rental is like one of the most expensive costs for it, so you can bring that down. You can also share it as a group. That's complicated, but we tried to do that in Armenia with funding from UNDP. We did, as an association, the festivals purchased a shared equipment pool, but we had a real problem, unfortunately, with corruption somewhere along the line, that they brought really poor quality tents, and so then nobody could end up using them. They broke the first time a festival organizer used them. So best laid plans also sometimes don't work, but for groups, associations like that, actually a shared equipment pool is something that you really could do, but you have to get really high quality stuff and then make agreements on people's responsibilities if they damage it, and coordinating the schedules and things like that. Other ways to reduce costs is making good use of volunteers. We talked about all the different things that volunteers can do, And so you can look at all the roles and responsibilities and see where you might be able to have a volunteer do something instead of somebody that you have to pay as a contractor. As I mentioned, building strong partnerships, you can have organizations that can provide things for you like project management, or, you know, if they have equipment, you can form partnerships for that. That's where that in-kind value comes in those contributions. And developing in-kind resources is like, that's a really good way of cutting costs. So maybe a partner doesn't have necessarily a way to give you resources, but they could offer you some sort of service or something like that that you could use for your festival. So I mentioned also the example of the lighting company for the Yerevan Wine Days. For that festival was in the evening. And so instead of paying for the lighting for the festival, they had a solar company that paid for the lighting in exchange for having a booth to sell solar during the festival. So you can make those kinds of partnerships. And then they set up the lighting and they handled all of that, and then they sold their services at the festival. So you can negotiate those kinds of partnerships to reduce some of your costs. Sometimes you can do that with advertising on tents as well, to find somebody who will have their brand on the tents as your, you know, and they're branded as that form of partnership. And we'll get more into that next with fundraising. Okay, so while you might not be able to sell tickets yourself, there is a method and a real value in ticketing and selling tickets, because that's a great way to cover basic costs of a festival. So I'm going to run through an example here. I have, unfortunately, in these slides, the examples are in American dollars, so just bear with me on it. But we're going to do some math. So you're going to start with your break-even point. So that's where the break-even point is where you're covering all the costs for the festival. Okay, so the information you need to have is your break-even point, a realistic ticket quantity, which you want to be very conservative about that, and then you take the break-even point and divide it by the ticket quantity. We're going to do an example, don't worry. And it's going to give you the lowest price you can charge and break even on the event. And if you want to add desired profit, I'm going to show you how to do that. So I have dollars here. Is everyone okay with that? Yeah, okay. I did $10,000 because it was kind of like a comparable, like one-day event. Let's say it's just a fair. Most of the costs are going to be around tents, tables, you know, lunch for participants, like a one-day kind of thing. And it's pretty reasonable to expect that if you have something open for a day and you do some solid advertising, you can get 1,000 people to come through. It's actually not that hard to get that number of people through Facebook marketing and things like that. So let's say you build your budget. Again, you want to start by building your budget, and you get to the point where you see that the cost of the event is going to be $10,000. If you know that you can get 1,000 people to come through, be conservative. Maybe you get more than that, but you would take the $10,000, divide it by $1,000, and then your ticket price for the event would be $10. So you're going to handle this, you're going to do this from two directions. First, you're going to do it based on your need, and then I'll tell you what to do next. But you're going to kind of create a range. So this is the break even. If you want to generate some revenue that you can use for the next year's festival or come back to you in the form of a donation, for example, let's say your goal is to get another $2,000. So cover all your costs and then put $2,000 in the bank so that you have that for next year. Take the $10,000, add the $2,000 profit that you want to make, again, divide it by your lowest number of guests that you think you'll get, and then you get $12. So your range of what you want to charge people is between $10 and $12. Okay, so that starts out with your information. You start to have those kind of numbers in your head. So then what you want to do is research similar events so that you're comparing apples to apples. So if you're going to do a festival that is like a folk festival, try and find other folk festivals in the country. Any other event that you think, like if it's an all-day family event that's offering similar things, what are they charging? And see how it compares to your ticket price. Because you can't have something, if you're offering, you know, if everyone else is charging $5 and you're saying $12, what's on offer? Like, people aren't going to be competitive. And then you have to also like look and make sure that the comparison events are well attended. If you see an event that charges like $25 or something like that, that doesn't mean that you can also charge that. Like, go and look and see if people actually attended that. Because sometimes it's not, just because it's a price on the market doesn't mean that it's actually reasonable. So, in addition to looking at other festivals and events, look at other ways that people spend time. How much do they spend going to the movies? What other things do people do that would take a day, where they can take their family and spend a day doing these activities? And you want to check and just make sure that the price that you're charging for a ticket falls somewhere in there for what you're providing. So, when you're selling tickets, there are ways that you can increase the number of tickets that you sell just through some sales tactics. One of them is early bird pricing. So you can charge a lower price for people who are early, like let's say 3 months out. And you can offer them, let them know that the price is going to go up the closer that you get to the event. That's a way to increase value and let people know that, like, you know, if you get it now, then that also helps get you some revenue a little bit earlier. You can also do a timed batch. I don't know about you, but I've gone to a lot of events like this, where you go and you buy a ticket, and they give you the illusion of scarcity. So they'll only release a certain number of tickets at a time, and if you miss it, then you have to wait for the next batch to come out. So that sense of urgency creates, you know, a prioritization that people are like, okay, I want to make sure I get my ticket so that I don't miss the event. And you can also bundle, as I mentioned. So think about what you can offer people at the festival. Could you do a VIP ticket in some way? The film festival you were talking about, where you have actors and film directors, is there some way for somebody to buy a VIP pass and get a chance to go in and like actually chat with one of those actors or attend a special event or something like that? And you can also do bundled pricing in tiers. It doesn't have to just be like one thing. You could do, you know, think about your market and who your audience and who you want to come. So you could do a special bundle for families where there's like certain kids activities or a certain area where they can go, or even like a little daycare area for kids where parents could drop their kids for a little while they go do another activity. There's different services like that that you can provide and then charge different prices for ticket packages. Does all make sense? How many of you are charging for your festivals? Cool, good. What do you charge? What's the price? You can just say it. I'll repeat it. €5. €5?
1.5 euro.
Okay.
It depends of the movie and the popularity of the movie, but between the 2.5 to €7, 7.5.
Okay, so you charge per screening, tickets for
Yep.
each screening. Cool. Okay. All right. All very reasonable. But you're in private sector, so does that allows you to make a profit? Yeah, that's great. That's great. Okay.